This is like most first-person co-op games that you probably played. Except it's melee-oriented, and it can be quite difficult. Too difficult, in fact. Especially since the game barely teaches you anything. It's a game that I'd like to recommend to people, but it might scare them away, so that's why I'm making this guide. Let's begin. Vermintide 2 is a 4-player hack-and-slash co-op game developed by Fat Shark Games, and it's a game that I recently started playing and couldn't put down thanks to its easy-to-learn but hard-to-master combat system. Well, that and the fact that the game usually throws so much BS on my way that I can't just let it slide without full retaliation. And I'm here to help you all skip some of the more obscure learning curves, as well as giving you a heads up when it comes to the shortcomings of the package in general, so you can enjoy it for what it is. A visceral co-op game where there's never a dull moment, characters never shut up, and where runs are sometimes determined by the mood of the AI director, who is pretty much unhinged and unpredictable. Now, before we begin, like what I said more than 100 words ago, I just started playing this recently, so I don't know anything about the game's overall history, so excuse my lack of knowledge there. Story: a bunch of man-sized rats created a portal, allowing them to join forces with some folks known as the Northlanders. Or was it Chaos? Or Rotbloods? They have several names for this for some reason, much like everything else in this game. Anyways, it is your job to break this little portal of friendship, and that's about it. Sure, there's a few snippets of context here and there, mostly on the loading screens or from the chatter between the characters, but other than that, you're on your own to discover this world that's about to end horribly. So after that lovely prologue through the Black Mesa Research Facility, somewhere in Mexico, you can pick your preferred career through the shiny little skull right next to the spawn or by pressing H for heroes. Now, it won't look like this at first since you need to level up the heroes in order to unlock their other careers. Specifically, you need to get a hero to level 7 in order to unlock its second career, and 12 for its third. For a 4-player co-op game, this has 5 heroes that you can choose from, each having 3 careers. Although if the elf is already in the game with her archery gear, that doesn't mean you can run her with her stealth gear, as much as I want to be tortured listening to 2 Karens at once. Now before we continue to the rest of the hub, let me give you a personal rundown of each of these careers, as they dictate your playstyle, role, and how much you really hate yourself. As an overview, each career has its own different health pool, career skill, cooldown, passive, and talent. Each hero can equip the same melee and range weapon across different careers, with some exceptions, while accessories are shared among all heroes. Now let's start with Kruber, the mustachio-twirling PTSD-stricken sergeant who's currently working for some guy named Victor Saltzpyre. More on him later. Anywho, Kunkka starts off as a mercenary, giving his teammates temporary health and trivializing the game's combat system. He is very beginner friendly, but he is so plain that I don't really hate newcomers for skipping him and going straight for the loudmouth instead. In terms of melee weapons, I suggest the Executioner's Sword to trivialize the game's complex combat system. Even with its slight nerf, it cannot be stopped. You see that, Horde? Just smash the left click until it goes away. You see that, Elite? Hold the left click and execute it incorrectly by smacking it in the head. He is very useful in a lot of situations since he can just make quick work of hordes while also being a very useful support. So useful in fact that he's almost unessential when playing solo. Freeman's second career is known as the Huntsman, who compared to the mercenary that kinda plays like a jack of all trades, the Huntsman is the opposite by sticking to its career name and overall backstory. So in short, he can do 2 things very well, find headshots and struggle. The former thanks to most of its talents being focused on using his ranged weapon, and the latter thanks to most of its talents being too focused on using its ranged weapons. In terms of his kit, I suggest going for something like the one-handed sword, the halberd, or any of the DLC weapons. In terms of range, well, you can go for any actually, but the exclusive weapon, a freaking bow, is the best. The Huntsman's days of role-playing a minigun are long gone, but it still has its uses. Very limited uses, but when it's his time to shine, he will cast his career skill, land some powerful shots, and then die because he's too focused on the monster or the patrol to notice a horde chipping on his butt. Lastly, for the Chosen Undead, we have the Foot Knight, who just by looking at his design will give away what he does. That's correct. Knockback! This guy has a beefy amount of health, a charge that can stun lock monsters 3 times his size, and an aura that gives everyone damage reduction. Most of his talents are also all about the knockback, so be prepared as the chase becomes a part of the experience. That's about it really, just control the crowds and support your team. Overall, Kruber as the mercenary is great, his second career is perfect for scaring people off, and the Foot Knight is the Foot Knight. He's not my favorite, but he has his place. It is rather sad though how few people actually level him up to max. But then again, like what I said before, he is rather plain, like unflavored gelatin. Next up we have Bardin, the Jolly Dwarf, stand-in Bard, rhetorical MacGuffin seeker. He starts off with one of the worst careers in the game, and my personal main, Ranger Veteran. So let me ask you this, have you ever wanted to help your team against a horde but your health and talents aren't helping? Ever wanted to feel so useless that you turn invisible just to cry on the corner because the range damage buff is barely noticeable? Have you ever wanted to be a range type career only for Fat Shark to put the other ranged weapons into the hands of the tank? Have you ever wanted to play a box of ammunitions on legs? Well, if you said yes to any of those things, then you're sick and pathetic, but this is the perfect class for you. The Ranger Veteran is a support career, not a range career, as much as the name suggests otherwise. And all you do is keep your teammates' ranged weapons happy and well fed in exchange for your own happiness. When it comes to his melee weapons, I suggest going for the two-handed ones as I think they actually do better than their one-handed or their shielded counterparts. Oh, and equip a shotgun. It'll give you some space that you really need. Next we have the Ironbreaker. Part tank, part taunting machine. He comes with a lot of health, a lot of damage resistance, and 2 exclusive ranged weapons just to flex on the Ranger Veteran. These exclusive ranged weapons have an interesting mechanic tied to them, but we'll save that later when we get to the meth head. His career skill is all about taunting, so put yourself in a good spot and take out the aggro as you watch your team try and fail to wipe them before all hell breaks loose. In terms of offense, I personally go for something like the Shielded Hammer, since it can block incoming enemy gunfire and tank monsters without much problem, while also providing great crowd control. The same can be said about his ranged weapons, the 2 exclusive ones that is. I personally go for the Drakefire pistols just to remind myself that the tank has a better shotgun than the actual range type career, or support. They feel great if a little janky to use at longer ranges thanks to the spread and bullet drop off. Finally, the Slayer. The angry boy with a hunger for killing, getting killed, pulling patrols, and if you're not used to his skill, jumping off ledges. He specializes in not being able to use any ranged weapons, unless if he had the DLC, and he's pretty good without them. He instead carries 2 melee weapons that he can mix and match as long as said melee weapon doesn't come with a shield. In the end, these pairings will determine how much you really hate your mouse. Did you equip 2 one-handed melee weapons? Well, congratulations, your mouse is about to break from all the clicking. Did you equip 2 two-handed melee weapons? Congratulations as well, your mouse is also about to break, only slower. This career is all about attack speed, so be prepared to do a lot of clicking. And that's about it for this guy. In terms of completion, he's actually tied with Victor when it comes to second place, but neither one of them actually takes the crown. Yep. It's about time that we talk about this bitch, Kerillian, or as my friends call her, Karen. The sarcastic, annoying loudmouth who sounds like she's in dire need of a pacifier, or some cheese and crackers with all that wine that she's been spilling. It is quite apparent when she's not a part of the team from the get-go, or is probably dead thanks to her lack of self-preservation, because it's going to be quieter than usual. Anywho, her first career is the Waystalker. This is your range kit, and you're all about the official meat of Hawaii. Spam. Or at least, that's how I use her. Compared to other range careers, she actually comes with 100% more ammo with her range weapons, instead of 50, which allows for a certain build to become a reality. First, you get a swift bow. This thing comes with 50 arrows, or 100 if you're using the Waystalker. Next, you put the Scrounger trait in it, along with critical strike chance for both the weapon and your accessory. Now equip the following talents, which are Serrated Shots, Enhanced Power, Spirit Arrows, Ricochet, and Cornus Reward. Got all that? Good. Now turn Markus's back into a hedgehog because he keeps running in front of you. Other than the larger ammo pouch, she actually comes with a very useful career skill, which fires an arrow that homes in on targets. Yep, these things can actually sense hostility. It's a very useful career skill compared to another one that we'll talk about later. Next we have the class that I use the least, the Handmaiden, or as my friends call her, the Clutch Queen. Mainly because of one specific talent that she gets at level 30, which can turn a losing battle into something that can actually be plausible again. She's all about the crits, the dodges, and the blocks. She may have higher health compared to her other careers, but that doesn't make her a tank. Think of her as the slippery survivor, if you can somehow survive with her. I certainly can't. She's one of the few careers out there that actually needs a bit of practice, so don't just jump into a pub with her unless if you want to embarrass yourself. I know I did. Seriously, respect to those who knows how to use this career, because truth be told, I still don't know how to. Lastly, we have the Shade, the monster-deleting, chaos warrior chomping assassin that is all about the smoke clouds and the ass stabs. She gains talents that allows her to deal more damage with her backstabs, turn invisible, or even gain ammo, somehow. Speaking of ammo, she comes with a 3-round burst crossbow that shoots through bolts like nobody's business. Be careful with that thing, because on higher difficulties, it'll hurt like hell. It's not the worst when it comes to friendly fire. That crown belongs to Saltzpyre's pistols, but it's up there. Now, unlike her other careers where I neglect to talk about the weapon, I would actually suggest something for the Shade. Either the dual daggers or the sword and dagger. This is because her career skill can actually get a lot of mileage if you use it with dual weapons. A career skill that will turn her invisible, allowing your next touch to actually knock someone beyond a state of unconsciousness. She's all about the burst damage, which is very useful when you're up against a monster or a boss. So, that's Kerillian. Can I get a volume slider for her, please? She has great classes to pick from, albeit difficult to use due to the lack of real defensive talents. She doesn't have much room for error. Remember that, as she has the lowest average health among her peers. She can be a very useful part of your team, as long as the person using her actually practiced. It's just a shame that most people who use her sucks. Yep, more people reach level 30 with her compared to other heroes. And not all of those players are created equally. Every time one joins the public lobby, it's a crapshoot whether or not she'll be styling on the game or dying repeatedly and leaving, thinking that the rest of us would not survive. Oh, how wrong they were. Moving on from the loudmouth, we have Victor Saltzpyre, the one-eyed Jesus freak that was caught in the middle of the invasion while escorting a drug addict. His first career is called the Witch Hunter, which is one of those jack-of-all-trades sort of situations like the Mercenary, minus the defensive buffs. I understand your urge to move on, but please hear me out. This is a flexible and powerful career, which also comes with one of the most interesting passives out there. Let's talk about tagging, shall we? A feature introduced to reduce the visual clutter of the game, unsuccessfully, and break my middle mouse button. When he is a part of your team, every single enemy that you tag, regardless of who tags it, takes extra damage. That's one thing to keep in mind when he's around. Or all the time, actually. You see, visual clarity is not actually the forte of this game. Like it's a part of the artificial difficulty. Equipment-wise, I suggest the Rapier. It's extremely versatile, but a little tricky to use. For your range weapons, go for the dual pistols as they can shred through enemies and Sienna pretty quickly. You can test out the other melee weapons, curse the one-handed axe to oblivion and then never touch it again, so I just stick with the Rapier. His next career is known as the Bounty Hunter, a career that tricks you into thinking that his helmet will actually do anything to prevent your rather timely demise. Known for one-tapping his own teammates and getting guaranteed critical hits for those extra friendly fire damage. This career is also known for stealing kills and complaining when someone does it to him. That is because his talent actually reduces damage taken by 1% for every special and elite enemy he kills. Keep this in mind when you have a bounty hunter around, as he will most likely take this talent compared to anything else. Speaking of taking a specific talent compared to everything else, Double Shot is one of those. This removes most of the piercing capabilities of his kill and replacing it with a monster killer that will surely make Kerillian blush when she's not 6 feet under. With this talent, you deal double damage while reducing the cooldown of the skill by 80% as long as you hit him in the head. Perfect for wiping out your entire team before they can properly retaliate. Sadly, this is where the fun ends for this guy, as playing him in melee is pretty depressing. Sure, he's a force to be reckoned with when it comes to range, like the Huntsman, but he's terrible when it comes to melee combat, much like the Huntsman. Only go for him when you have a clear understanding of his melee weapons and kit in general, or disregard all of that and spend most of the time looking at the game's waiting to be rescued screen, where you belong.
And so we reach the Game Breaker, the utter clutch maestro, and the guy who's really into BDSM. As long as the S stands for Sigmar.
Zealot! A class that's all about getting rewarded for your mistakes. With the right setup, you can get increased damage, attack speed, defense, or movement the lower your permanent health gets. That means you can still hold on to temporary health while you dab on the other careers, since you're pretty much better than them in almost every single way imaginable. Your primary passive gives you more power the lower your health is, while the talents pretty much covers everything else. Because of this, almost every single weapon is actually viable with him. Even the slower weapons becomes a blur when you have Swift Slaying and Castigate. Now, unlike the Slayer, he actually gets to keep his ranged weapons, along with any melee weapon without sacrificing bonus power or attack speed, because he just gets both. And being at low health isn't that high of a price to pay, since you can just fill it back up with temporary health, like nothing ever happened. In summary, this career is silly strong, much like his other careers, but unlike those careers that still has some risk tied to them, you can pretty much brute force the entire game with this one. And I don't know what to say about that, really. Finally we get to Sienna. Pyromaniac, resident prisoner, and de facto auntie of the team. She's a bit of an odd one to say the least. Her careers are far less defined compared to others, as her weapon of choice actually dictates her role more than anything else. And she's probably the toughest one to learn for me personally. So let's begin with her first career, the Battle Wizard. A career known for her game-breaking skill. Originally used as crowd control or as a means to escape, is now used to find holes in invisible walls. Yep, this thing can finish the final mission of the game within a few minutes because someone out there forgot to close off all the holes on the map. That was back then. Thanks, Fat Shark, you finally fixed it. I think. Her talents are all about dealing more range damage, burn enhancement, and venting quicker. Right, venting. I think it's about time that we segue into that caveat, huh? Overcharge is a fun little mechanic found on Sienna's range weapon and the two exclusive weapons of the Ironbreaker. It allows these weapons to technically have infinite ammo as long as you don't overuse them, because if you do, you'll explode. Also, keep in mind that while you're overcharged, your attack speed, movement speed, and dodge distance are all affected unless if you take certain talents. Now, overcharge cools off by itself, or you can vent it out manually by using the reload button in exchange for some of your health. It is best to take the hit for the most part compared to being caught with your pants down and your weapon isn't fully cooled off yet. Anywho, according to my rather hollow head, she has two viable builds. One focuses on dealing high damage with a fully charged bolt staff, while the other is all about slowly burning monsters from the inside out thanks to her microwave gun, aka the beam staff. To increase her defense, go get Suit Shield as a talent, and then equip something like the Flame Sword to give yourself 30% damage reduction for the foreseeable future. Or until you get too complacent and die horribly because you forgot that you can yeet yourself out of existence by using your skill, instead of just using it offensively. In the end, the Battle Wizard is useful and probably the easiest one to understand between her three careers, mainly because she's rather straightforward and her skill has many uses, unlike her second career. Pyromancer, the other range spam-heavy melee career. Wait, is this the melee class? I don't know really. Anyways, remember that overcharged thing? She gets increased critical strike chance the more it's filled up, and with a certain range weapon trait known as Heat Sink, which allows critical spells to not generate overcharge. She can spam her stabs far longer as a Pyromancer compared to her other careers. And when it's almost full, just swap to your melee weapon and beat the crap out of every single enemy with your frequent critical hits. Maximizing this one passive makes her quite challenging to use, but oh boy is she extremely thrilling once you get a hang of her. As long as you're using a weapon that can cleave well or deals a lot of damage like the Billhook or the Flame Dagger, a weapon that can somehow cleave through everything with a single charge attack. Thanks, Fat Shark. When it comes to staff, just go for the Magic Circle or the Fireball. The Circle as a fully charged spell and the Fireball as a uncharged charged spell. In terms of issues, well, there's the how do I say this? The skill is useless. Just get the temporary health upgrade for it and then don't think about it ever again. Once you're low in health, don't bother aiming and just throw it in the air, because if you do anything other than that, you will be treated with something that's unpredictable, weak, and just plain horrible. This thing can sometimes miss, wander off elsewhere trying to hit a different target, or even hit the target without killing it. I tried it once on a loot rat and it just knocked the poor guy off a ledge. We reached it. The final career. In terms of the base game anyways. This is the Unchained. My absolute favorite when it comes to her 3 careers, and my second most used career overall. But even though that may be the case, I still don't know what her role is. Apparently, her overcharge increases her melee damage, but I don't use her as a melee career. Oh, and she also takes 50% less damage, so she can be considered a tank? But I would advise not going for that because that other 50% goes to your overcharge, and you know what happens when that thing gets filled up. Like, we're talking 2 to 3 hits when it comes to the higher difficulties, and then you blow up. But there is a way to stop this by using her career skill known as Living Bomb, where she harmlessly explodes, venting out all of her overcharge in the process. And while that skill is in cooldown, you need to be in your A game to make sure that you don't blink in the wrong millisecond. Unless if you want to lose all of that precious health just because a few floor rats started to spawn out of a hole that isn't there. And sadly you are hit out of nowhere while you're firing your charged Flamestorm staff. You see, when that happens, the Flamestorm staff stops firing, but since your left mouse button is held, you will suddenly do a weaker, uncharged attack that creates more overcharge than the charged version of the attack. Now combine how much overcharge was made just from you charging the first spell, getting hit in the butt, and then being forced to use an uncharged spell because your left mouse button is held. You know what's gonna happen? Explosion. Funny thing is, it doesn't happen when you're charging the staff, so you still need to click that right mouse button again in order to recharge the spell. So I can only assume that that was done on purpose. So thanks, Fat Shark. But yeah, I used the Flamestorm staff in this lovely career thanks to a certain talent known as Chain Explosion. This single talent can trivialize the Horde, the melee combat that the game is so proud of, and the ability of your teammates to gain any temporary health, forcing them to focus on taking down the other targets instead of worrying about their well-being, mainly because you took all of those opportunities and burned them to the ground. Speaking of staffs, you're gonna be doing a lot of friendly fire damage. Well, a lot of friendly fire, but not exactly damage. You see, the thing with this career along with her other careers is that you'll be hitting your teammates a lot, but don't expect to deal a lot of damage. I mean, you're not holding any brace pistols. Unless if you have a fully charged magic circle or a fully charged bolt staff, you're not gonna be dealing a lot of damage to your teammates. So just go ahead and burn Kruber's ass while you're at it. He won't mind, I swear. But yeah, that's Sienna. A very different beast compared to the rest of her team. She is either super fun or super frustrating for both you and your teammates. All I can say is experiment, since there is a chance that my builds will not work for you. Her careers are all over the place along with her staffs, so just experiment until you get sick of her and never touch her again, or fall in love with her as you find new ways to cheese the game. And with that, we are done with the careers, at least the ones on the base game. Let's head back to the keep and snoop around, shall we? Taal's Horn Keep. This is your little playground. It's where you switch heroes, change equipment, change outfits, choose missions, craft, modify, and salvage equipment, test your damage, skills, or some talents, open loot boxes, check daily missions, and check the cosmetic store. So let's get the light stuff out of the way before we get into the nitty-gritty, shall we? We begin with a few knickknacks that you can pick up while exploring the keep, plus a few items that aren't found in the keep but still fall in the same category. Consumables includes healing items, performance-enhancing drugs, and explosives. When it comes to the healing items, we have the medical supplies, which heals you for 80% of your max health while removing wounds. Right. Wounds, by the way, are gained after a player goes down in combat. Each difficulty has a different limit on how much wounds a character can take before they die on the next down. If this happens, the player needs to wait for 30 seconds before being rescued elsewhere. Anywho, medical supplies can also be used on allies by using the block button. Doing so will also clear any wounds that you may have in the process. Healing Draft heals you for 75 health points while clearing all wounds. They, however, cannot be force-fed on your teammates unlike medical supplies. On the same slot as the healing items, there's also this thing called tomes. 3 can be found on each map and they don't change location, so once you know where they are, you don't need to worry about finding them. You can only get use out of these things if you can bring them to the end of the map, as they will boost your loot box bar's progression so that you can get better loot. I'm gonna explain that later. These tomes can be dropped by picking up a healing item or by dying, which then can be picked back up by you or your teammates or left forgotten because my memory is horrible. All 3 of these uses the 3rd slot on your inventory. Potions are carried on your 4th slot, and they are utility-based drinks that gives you temporary buff for 10 seconds. Concentration reduces your career skills cooldown. Speed increases your movement and attack speed, obviously, while strength increases the damage and armor-piercing capabilities of your weapons. This slot also houses a little item that can make your runs miserable. A little item known as the Grimoire, or as I like to call them, Grim Tomes. Each of these tomes will reduce you and your team's maximum health by around 30%, and there are 2 found on each map. They are very well hidden and, like tomes, have a static location. Also like tomes, they have no uses in-game, but they give a really big bonus to your loot box bar if you can bring them to the end. Unlike tomes, however, they cannot be recovered when lost due to death, or when they are discarded by holding the attack button while the Grim is held. Now, a word of advice before we continue. If you ever dare to dive into the cesspit that is public matchmaking, please do ask your team if they're willing to do a Grim run before you pick up any of them. You may be all on the same map with the same difficulty, but that doesn't mean you are all on the same page when it comes to what you want to accomplish on that run. Now for a less serious PSA, remove the mouse wheel keybind when cycling through your equipment, and memorize the numbers instead. You'll thank me later. Lastly, for the consumables, we have the throwables, which are not actually consumables. They are located in your 5th slot. These includes 2 types of grenades. First being the bomb that deals considerable damage while staggering those who can survive its blast. The second type is called the incendiary bomb, which also has an initial blast, albeit weaker, while leaving a puddle of fire on the ground, taking down weaker enemies. Keep in mind that the initial blast on higher difficulties will tickle your teammate's taint, while the flame itself is harmless. The same cannot be said about the barrel counterpart, however. The oil lamp will kill you and your teammates faster than whatever you're trying to kill with it, so caution is advised. The explosive barrel, on the other hand, is just the same as the bombs for the most part, and you'll be using them more to finish map objectives, rather than using them offensively, unless if you have nothing else to throw at a monster to stagger it. Next up on our tour of the keep, we have equipment. By pressing I for inventory, or by going to the armory, you can tweak your gear, which is empty at the start, but it will slowly and surely flourish, so that you can burn it all and create new gear from the ashes. Your inventory comes with 5 slots, first being your melee weapon, second being your ranged weapon, and then there are the 3 types of accessories, each affecting a certain aspect of your character. But before we dive into your equipment, we need to talk about Rarity. Rarity affects how many properties an item can have, and if it can hold a trait. A bonus passive that isn't randomized in terms of its potency compared to properties. Starting with the white items, they have no properties or traits to speak of.
So just burn and turn them all into scraps, and never think of them again.
Greens are used to make green dust, because you need more of it, and you're always running out. Oh, and they also have 1 property. They are pretty rare on the late game, that the only way for me to gather these efficiently is by doing poorly on a map and getting a crappier loot box, or by doing really well on the hardest difficulty and getting an Emperor's Vault, which are oddly consistent on giving me greens. So thank you, Fat Shark Games. Blues are tolerable pieces of equipment that contains 2 properties instead of 1, and they can be grinded into blue dust, the green dust's more common cousin. Oranges are what you usually go for when you're done leveling your hero, maxing out your item power, and are ready to enter that fabled main game. These oranges comes with 2 properties, like the blues, and a trait. Unlike the blues, reds are the so-called veteran items, which glows like hell just to give you less visibility on a game that barely has it. They are the same as oranges for the most part, with just a single difference. Every time you reroll the properties of that item, it will get the maximum roll every single time. They can also be turned into this thing called the bright dust, which can upgrade other equipment into reds without the glowy bit. Since the red's glow counts as cosmetic, if you want to get the glowy bit, you need to have one drop naturally via loot box. Specifically, a General/Emperor chest from Champion difficulty, or most of the vaults on Legend difficulty. You got all that? Good. Let's start with the necklaces. This accessory affects your stamina, blocking, and pushing effectiveness, along with damage reduction to a certain enemy type, which sadly does not include your teammates, and most importantly, a percentage increase to your maximum health. In terms of traits, they affect your healing items, or the health bar itself. Something like Natural Bond is amazing for tanks. Just keep in mind that if you want to get some permanent health back, you need to be healed by your own teammates, unless if you want to run around all day with just temporary health. Next we have the charms. These are the ones that you need to collect, since they affect a lot of things, like damage to a certain race, a certain enemy type, attack speed, and critical power. Mixing and matching these properties will give you certain advantages in combat, and most importantly, amplify the role of your career. When it comes to traits, the only thing it affects are potions, and I have nothing to say other than that. Lastly, for the accessories, we have the trinkets. And oh boy, these are all over the place. We're talking critical hit chance, movement speed, cooldown reduction, revive speed, respawn timer duration, and most importantly, curse resistance. You know, that beautiful curse known as the Grimoire, Grimtomes, heard of it? I suggest rerolling one of your trinkets until it gets a max roll on curse resistance, if you're willing to go for those Grim runs. When it comes to traits, they're all about the throwables. Just go for shrapnel and leave it at that. And now that we're done with the accessories, let's talk about the first lot, your melee weapons properties. Some of these are also found in the ranged weapons, that being critical strike chance, critical damage, and the bonus against a certain race. In terms of exclusive properties, we have stuff that increases your attack speed, stamina, how wide your guard is, and how much stamina it takes after successfully blocking an attack. Trait-wise, they are pretty boring with the exception of Opportunist and Swift Slaying. One is very useful at knocking off enemies that are about to hit you with a well-timed parry, while the other one gives you 20% more attack speed for a few seconds every time you land a critical hit. And that's a lot of attack speed coming from a weapon trait, compared to some certain talents that also gives you attack speed. So thanks, Fat Shark! Now when it comes to the ranged weapons exclusive properties, they are all about taking down a specific enemy type, be it infantry, armored, a monster, or those freaking berserkers. Which I highly recommend, especially when it comes to shotguns, as a single blast can actually go through multiple enemies. Their traits are all about relying on critical hits, relying on headshots, breaking the rules of overheating, or whatever the hell inspirational shot is. Each ranged weapon works with its own set of properties and traits, and are as diverse as the careers that the game provides. Unlike the melee weapons, where you can just go attack speed with critical strike chance and swift slaying your way to victory. The last thing that we need to talk about the equipment is this thing called Hero Power. This is the one stat that I've been ignoring this entire time, since it's technically the only one that's a nuisance once you reach max level. This stat is affected by hero level and your equipment's item power. Hero Power affects damage, stagger strength, and cleave power, so it's very important on the latter difficulties. This will come up again once we're in crafting, but before that, we need to talk about talents. A segue, I know, but it's how it's set up in the menu, so don't question me. Talents are passives that you get every 5 levels. A talent changes or enhances what your career can do. And before you ask, no, you don't get any bonuses by going through a single column, which means you can mix and match however you please. No, enhanced power is only useful if you want to do more damage with your ranged weapon, and nothing else. And yes, both the level 15 and level 5 talents do look similar across all careers, but please read each one of them as there are some differences. For the level 5 talents, these are all about getting temporary health, with the exception of the third choice, which allows your healing to be an area of effect around you. There are 4 variations on how to earn temporary health. One is cleaving through multiple enemies with one swing, one is by getting melee headshots, critical hits, or both, one is by staggering an enemy, which also works with pushes by the way, and lastly is by doing killing blows, where the type of enemy affects how much temporary health you gain. For the level 15 talents, it's all about stagger, with the exception of the third option, which increases the power of your ranged weapons. There are also 4 variations when it comes to the stagger talents, starting with Mainstay, a talent that's all about dealing extra damage to enemies that are already staggered, by up to 60%. Smiter is about dealing extra damage on the first target regardless if they are staggered or not, with bonus damage on consequent staggers by up to 40%. Assassin is about dealing 40% extra damage on critical hits and headshots. And lastly we have Bulwark, which gives a temporary debuff to an enemy, making them take 10% more damage when they are staggered. Alright, now we're at crafting. And inside crafting, it's a tab known as crafting, a tab where you think you'll be spending most of your time in. As you level up, you'll be unlocking blueprints in order to create specific equipment. Doing so will craft one in a random rarity other than red. I think. I haven't seen one pop out as red though. Anywho, moving on to rerolling properties, the tab where you'll be spending most of your time in the category known as crafting. This process is done by using 1 green dust and 1 blue dust to reroll an item's property and their potency. Same goes when rerolling traits, which uses oranges. Both of these tasks can be accomplished while the weapon is equipped. Next up we have upgrading. This uses scrap to put an item on a higher rarity while forcing a reroll and without increasing the item's power. Scraps are used up until you reach orange, which will then require red dust in order to upgrade the weapon from an orange to a red rarity. In terms of weapon cosmetics, we have illusions. These are unlocked by opening loot boxes and acquiring a weapon with a swirly symbol. Once you get it, it is unlocked for that weapon type in particular. Although this does not include dual weapons or weapons that are shared between heroes. So Karen cannot use the Elven Sword illusion on her dual swords, and Bardin cannot use Victor's crossbow illusions for his own. Back then, you cannot put illusions on anything that you have equipped. Thankfully they changed that. The last tab is all about converting dust, which is pretty self-explanatory, so we'll move on to the cosmetics. After these messages. A word of advice. Until you reach max level, which is currently 35, don't bother using any of your dust for rerolling, don't open any surplus loot box, or even build any new gears from scraps. Just hold on to those. Only open loot boxes every time you level up, pick gears that are of higher item power, and salvage the older ones. Once you reach level 35, the real pain begins. You see, after reaching max level, you're probably not gonna be at maximum hero power, which is 650. That is because the maximum item power caps at 300, and it doesn't reach that point even though you're at level 35. Thanks Fat. So what do you do about it? It's simple. We start crafting. Check your equipment and craft whatever you have that has the lowest item power. Once you're out of crafting materials, open a loot box, equip anything with a higher number, and salvage the rest. Repeat until you reach item power 300. Only then can I actually let you move on into another character, or finalize your current build by upgrading gears, rerolling properties, or choosing the perfect trait. And remember, you'll always run out of green dust no matter what. Lastly, for this cursed keep, we have cosmetics, which are the shallow things that you try and get before realizing that they are a waste of time, since there's barely any unique helmets, and clothing options are mostly palette swaps. You can change these by going into the bottom of your inventory, or by going to either the smithy, the armory, or the closet next to it. You can earn frames, palette swap clothing, and weird looking hats in one of 4 ways. One is by reaching a certain level, one is by opening a specific type of loot box, the commendation loot box, which you can get by leveling up or by completing certain challenges, by paying, and finally by doing specific hat, frame, and clothing challenges, which are found on the Heroes tab on Okri's challenges, which you can check by going to the book with a skull on it, or by pressing O for Okri. These challenges will give you some sick threads and some frames once you conquer them. They are pretty bearable for the most part. Okri's book also comes with some daily and weekly challenges, alongside some events that happens every now and then. Each daily challenges nets you 5 shillings, while the weekly ones gives you 50. You can use said shillings on Loner's shop, which you can access by talking to him or by pressing P for power. Here is where you can purchase cosmetic items that pulls from the same pool as the ones from the commendation chest. This is also the place where you'll find the paid cosmetic items.